In a mansion filled with wealth and silence, a young girl lives in a world of darkness. Born blind, Eliza, the Duke's daughter, has known only the shadows, while her father, Duke Edward, has spent millions in search of a cure, only to be met with failure. But what if the answer to Eliza's blindness wasn't hidden in the finest medical minds? What if it lay in the hands of someone with no formal training, someone whose love for the child was stronger than any degree or title? Hi, lovely soul. I am glad to have you here. If you're enjoying this story, a like or subscribe would mean the world to me. It helps me keep sharing more heartfelt tales with you. And if you're up for it, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. It sure means a whole lot to me. The grand estate of Duke Edward was a place of beauty and serenity, nestled deep in the countryside. Its sprawling gardens and towering stone walls, a testament to centuries of aristocratic legacy. Within these walls, Duke Edward and his beloved wife, Catherine, had built a life that was filled with wealth, privilege, and a shared dream, a dream of having a family. For years, they had waited, longing for a child to complete their perfect world. Their love had been their greatest joy, but it was always the hope of a child that filled their hearts with the promise of something more. Catherine had been a vision of grace and strength, with eyes that sparkled with intelligence and compassion. Her laughter echoed through the hallways, and her gentle presence had brought warmth to the cold stone walls of the estate. Duke Edward adored her, cherishing every moment they shared, and together they had built a life of unimaginable comfort. But in the quiet moments, both of them yearned for one thing, their own child. When Catherine discovered she was pregnant, the joy that enveloped them was unlike any they had known before. The halls of the estate, once only filled with their voices, now echoed with the sounds of anticipation. Catherine's pregnancy became the beacon of their hope. The servants watched with admiration as the Duchess glowed, carrying the child they had long dreamed of. The days seemed to stretch on endlessly, each one drawing them closer to the moment they would finally become parents. But the reality of life, with all its unpredictability, took a cruel turn on the day of the birth. The labor was long and grueling. The doctors, summoned from the finest hospitals in the land, had assured Duke Edward that everything would go smoothly. They had promised him that Catherine, a healthy woman, would be just fine. Yet, as the hours passed, an uncomfortable stillness began to settle in the room. Catherine's cries of pain became quieter, more strained. The Duke, unable to leave her side, clutched her hand, whispering reassurances, trying to keep her calm. "Hold on, Catherine," he urged. "Just a little longer, love. Our daughter will be here soon." Her face was pale, drenched with sweat, but her smile never wavered as she reached for his hand. "I can feel her, Edward. She's so close," Catherine whispered, her voice a mere breath. The birth was finally upon them, and with one last cry, Eliza entered the world. The child was tiny but perfect, wrapped in a soft blanket. For a moment, everything seemed still silent. The Duke held his breath, waiting for the first sound, the first cry of life from their precious daughter. But instead of crying, the room fell into an eerie quiet. "Why isn't she crying?" the Duke asked urgently, his voice trembling with panic. The doctor's face was unreadable as he moved quickly, assessing the situation. The seconds stretched into minutes, each one filled with unbearable tension. Finally, the child's cry broke through the silence, a weak, delicate sound. The Duke exhaled in relief, but his relief was short-lived. As Catherine reached out, her eyes glistening with joy, to hold her daughter for the first time, she collapsed back against the pillow. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and the color drained from her face. The Duke froze, his hand still gripping hers, but this time it was different. Something was wrong. His heart pounded in his chest as he looked into her eyes, searching for the woman he had loved so deeply, but he saw only fear. "Catherine, no," he whispered desperately. "Stay with me. Please, don't leave me." Her lips moved in a weak, trembling smile. "Take care of her, Edward." "Promise me," she gasped. The Duke shook his head frantically. "Catherine, no, I can't lose you." But her eyes fluttered shut, her breath halting. Her body went limp in his arms. A piercing silence filled the room, broken only by the soft cry of their newborn daughter in the background. The doctors rushed forward, but they were too late. Catherine was gone. The grief that followed was indescribable. The Duke, once a man of power and influence, was reduced to a hollow shell of himself. His world, once full of light and laughter, now seemed forever shrouded in darkness. The loss of Catherine was more than he could bear, but the responsibility of their daughter, Eliza, weighed even heavier on his heart. Eliza, the child of his greatest love, was now the only piece of her mother he had left. In the days that followed, the Duke's sorrow consumed him. He rarely left Catherine's chambers, and when he did, he was distant, his mind preoccupied with thoughts of what could have been. Eliza was the only reason he rose from his bed each morning. She was a constant reminder of the woman he had loved and lost, and though she was a newborn, she became his anchor, the one thing that kept him tethered to the world. As the years passed, the Duke's grief transformed into something else, an obsession. He became fixated on Eliza's well-being, determined to honor Catherine's memory by protecting their daughter at all costs. When he discovered Eliza was born blind, his obsession grew even stronger. Doctors and specialists came and went, but none had answers. He poured every resource he had into finding a cure, but the blindness was deemed irreversible. The Duke couldn't accept it. He couldn't accept that the child who held so much of Catherine in her small hands would live in a world of darkness. He vowed to do whatever it took to restore her sight. The weight of his promise to Catherine hung heavily on him, propelling him forward even when the world seemed to crumble around him. Eliza was all he had left, and he would move heaven and earth to ensure she never knew the pain of losing her mother. But little did he know, the journey to help his daughter would take him down a path he never expected, one that would lead him to a truth that would forever change his life. Eliza's blindness was evident from the moment she was placed in his arms. Her wide eyes, filled with innocence, seemed to stare at nothing, a blankness that echoed the absence of Catherine in his life. Duke Edward held her close, whispering promises to her, but deep down he couldn't shake the fear that perhaps the universe had robbed him twice in a row. As the months passed, the Duke refused to accept the fate that had been dealt to Eliza. He spent countless nights pacing the halls of his mansion, his mind consumed with thoughts of how to help her. The guilt that weighed on his chest was suffocating, a constant reminder of the promise he had made to Catherine that their daughter would never know a life of suffering. He would do anything, everything, to keep that promise. In his desperation, Duke Edward consulted the finest specialists, not only in England but around the world. He flew to London, Paris, and even Tokyo, seeking answers. He spared no expense, throwing money at the problem in hopes of finding a solution. One after another, the doctors ran countless tests, performing intricate procedures and scans, but each visit ended in the same cold, heartbreaking conclusion. Her blindness is congenital, they told him. There is no cure. The condition is irreversible. Each time he heard those words, his heart broke a little more. How could this be? How could his daughter, a living reminder of Catherine's love, be doomed to live in darkness for the rest of her life? The doctors spoke with certainty, their voices clinical, their words final. The Duke's desperation grew as the treatments continued to fail. The wealth and resources at his disposal could not change the reality of Eliza's condition. He felt helpless, he felt powerless, and with each failed attempt, the mansion became quieter, the silence more deafening. As the years passed, the Duke's emotional decline deepened. He had promised Catherine, in the final moments of her life, that he would care for Eliza, that he would protect her from the world's cruelties. But as he watched her grow older, the weight of his promise crushed him. He had done everything in his power, but it hadn't been enough. Every failed treatment, every doctor who claimed there was nothing more to be done, chipped away at the man he once was. Once a figure of strength and authority, the Duke now wandered the halls of his grand estate in a daze, consumed by guilt and regret. The walls of the mansion, which once echoed with the sound of Catherine's laughter, now rang with silence. Eliza's laughter, though sweet, was often stifled, and the joy that once filled the house seemed to have vanished along with Catherine. He found himself withdrawing from everything. He couldn't bear the thought of facing the world outside the mansion, where people might ask about Eliza, where they might inquire about her health. He didn't know how to answer them. How could he explain to anyone that, despite all his wealth, his status, and his resources, he couldn't help his daughter? The mansion that had once been a home full of life became a tomb of memories. The servants moved about quietly, their footsteps barely making a sound, sensing the heavy atmosphere that hung in the air. Even the seasons seemed to pass in silence. The grand estate that had once been full of vibrant colour now seemed draped in shadows, and Duke Edward could no longer bring himself to enjoy the beauty of the world around him. The gardens, the towering oak trees, the fields of green, everything seemed distant, out of reach, like a world he no longer belonged to. At night, when he finally lay in his bed, the weight of Eliza's blindness pressed on him like a leaden blanket. He would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Catherine and what she would have wanted for their daughter. The promises he had made to her echoed in his mind, mocking him for his failure to live up to them. He had spent years trying to fix Eliza's blindness, throwing money and resources at the problem. He had trusted the doctors, he had trusted the specialists, and yet none of them had the answers. He had placed his faith in them, believing that money could buy a solution to his daughter's suffering. But now, with every failed attempt, the realization sank in. There was no cure. No matter what he did, Eliza's world would remain forever dark. He began to question everything he had believed in. Was his wealth worth anything if it couldn't save his daughter? Could anything, other than pure love, heal her? The answers eluded him, and the darkness of his own despair mirrored Eliza's blindness. The house, the mansion, the land, everything felt suffocating. He longed for the joy and light that had once filled these walls, but it seemed so far out of reach now. As the years passed, Duke Edward's despair grew. The mansion that once resonated with hope and dreams was now nothing more than a prison of silence and unspoken grief. But little did he know, a simple truth was waiting to be discovered, one that would come from the most unlikely source. The answer to his daughter's suffering and to the promise he had made to Catherine lay not in his wealth or the doctors he trusted, but in a humble maid with no formal training. This truth would shatter his world and change everything he thought he knew about life, love, and healing. Lily had always been a quiet presence in the Duke's grand estate, moving like a shadow through the vast hallways, cleaning and dusting, always mindful of the silence that hung in the air. She was hired to maintain the beauty of the home, to ensure that everything shone just as the Duke expected. But her true gift lay in something deeper, her empathy. Unlike many of the other servants, Lily had a keen eye for detail. She could sense when something was wrong before it was spoken, and she could read the unspoken moods of those around her, which was why she noticed Eliza. Eliza, the Duke's daughter, had been born blind. Lily had never seen her gaze the world as others did. Eliza's eyes, although open, seemed to be perpetually lost in a void. It was something Lily couldn't quite place. Most of the time, Eliza sat alone in her room, surrounded by soft toys or books, but rarely did she engage with them. The once vibrant laughter that should have filled the estate was absent in Eliza's presence, replaced instead with a heavy silence that seemed to echo off the walls. The little girl, now nearing 8 years old, rarely ventured outside, and when she did, it was always in the company of a servant or her father. The Duke, though ever present, was consumed by his own sadness and guilt. He was often distant, walking with his head down as if lost in thoughts he could not escape. Despite his wealth and status, there seemed to be no remedy for his daughter's condition. The walls of the mansion, once filled with life and joy, now felt like a mausoleum of grief, and Eliza, too, seemed to have inherited that weight. Lily could see it in her, too, the loneliness. Eliza wasn't just blind, she was isolated, and Lily, with her soft heart, could not ignore it. Unlike the other servants, who had learned to treat Eliza with an air of cautious distance, Lily had found herself quietly drawn to the little girl. She would occasionally find Eliza gazing out the window, touching the glass with her fingers as though she could feel the world just beyond her reach. There were times, fleeting moments, when Eliza would smile, a soft, bittersweet curve of her lips, but it always seemed so out of place in the silence that surrounded her. Lily's first true concern for Eliza came on a dreary Tuesday afternoon. She had been assigned to clean the grand hallway, polishing the old portraits of the Duke's ancestors that lined the walls. As she passed by Eliza's room, she heard the soft sound of the child's small fingers tapping lightly against something. Curious, Lily peeked inside. Eliza was sitting on the floor, surrounded by a pile of dolls and wooden toys, but her eyes, those eyes, were focused on nothing in particular. Her hand reached out to touch the toys, but there was no real engagement, just a mechanical touch that lacked any real connection. Lily's heart clenched. Then she saw it. There was something in Eliza's eyes, a subtle but noticeable discoloration. It was faint, almost imperceptible, But to Lily, who had always paid close attention to detail, it stood out like a sore thumb. It was almost as if there was something inside her eye, a dark shadow or haze that seemed to obscure her vision. It was an odd, unsettling sight, something Lily had never seen in the young girl before. For a moment, Lily hesitated. She thought it might be nothing, just the light playing tricks, or perhaps her mind running wild. But the more she watched, the more she became convinced that there was something wrong, something hidden in Eliza's eyes that no one had noticed before. The child was blind, yes, but could this be the key to understanding why? Was there something physically obstructing her sight? Lily quietly left the room, her thoughts swirling in confusion. She had no medical training, no knowledge of how to help Eliza, but the sensation of something being wrong gnawed at her. As the days passed, she continued to observe Eliza from a distance. Each time she saw the faint discoloration in Eliza's eyes, her concern grew. At first, Lily tried to dismiss it. She wasn't a doctor, after all. What could a simple maid like her possibly know about blindness? But she could not shake the feeling that there was something more to Eliza's condition, something that had been overlooked. Maybe it was the constant silence in the estate, or maybe it was the stark emptiness in Eliza's gaze, but something inside Lily told her that Eliza deserved more than what she was getting. In her quiet moments, when she was alone in her room, Lily would think about it. She would picture Eliza sitting there, her small hands resting in her lap, her face full of confusion, her mind likely questioning the same things. Was it possible that a simple obstruction in her eye was the cause of her blindness? Could something so small be preventing her from seeing the world around her? Lily thought of her grandmother, who had once treated minor ailments with remedies and old-fashioned techniques. Her grandmother, although uneducated in the ways of medicine, had a keen intuition for what ailed the body. It was that intuition Lily trusted now. But to act would be dangerous. What if she was wrong? What if the obstruction wasn't there at all? What if, by intervening, she made things worse? The consequences of acting on her own without the Duke's permission, without any medical authority, were enough to make Lily tremble with fear. Yet, the more she thought about it, the more she felt an undeniable pull to help Eliza, to do what no one else seemed willing to do. Lily was not blind to the social dynamics of the household. She knew her place. She was a maid, nothing more, and she understood the risks of stepping out of line. But in her heart, she knew that if she didn't do something, Eliza might spend the rest of her life in silence and darkness, with no one to care enough to find out why. As the days went by, Lily's concern deepened into quiet determination. She could not ignore what she had seen. There was something in Eliza's eyes, something that could be the key to unlocking her sight. The faint discoloration was no accident, it was real, and it was something that had been missed by everyone who had examined Eliza. Lily's desire to help grew into a quiet obsession. She began researching in her spare time, quietly gathering information on eye conditions, blindness, and possible treatments. She knew she didn't have the power to change everything, but perhaps, just perhaps, she could be the one to give Eliza a glimpse of the world she had been deprived of. The road ahead would be risky, and there was no guarantee of success, but Lily's heart told her that it was worth the chance. Lily could no longer ignore the growing sense of urgency that had taken root in her heart. For days, she had observed Eliza, watching her touch her eyes with that familiar, almost instinctual movement, as though something within her sight was obstructed. The thought gnawed at her constantly. There had to be something there, something that had been missed by every doctor who'd ever examined Eliza. The girl's blindness, though acknowledged by the doctors as permanent, might be caused by something far simpler than the world had ever realized. Lily could feel the weight of her discovery pressing on her chest, suffocating her in the silence of her own mind. It was as though she was standing at the edge of a precipice, staring into a vast unknown, with only a flimsy thread of hope keeping her from falling. The idea of acting on this instinct, of intervening when no one else dared, terrified her. She wasn't a doctor, just a maid with no training or formal knowledge. What if she was wrong? What if her actions caused more harm than good? Yet, despite the fear that gripped her, a part of her knew that doing nothing was far worse. If she didn't act, Eliza might remain trapped in a world of darkness, without anyone ever discovering the simple cause. The thought of Eliza, so young and innocent, living her entire life in silence, was unbearable. One evening, after another long, silent day in the mansion, Lily sat in the small room she shared with a few other servants, her mind racing. She had spent the day quietly watching Eliza as she sat alone by the window, her hands pressing against the glass as if trying to feel the world she could not see. The pale glow of the setting sun illuminated Eliza's face, and for a moment she looked almost serene. But then, as usual, her hand reached up to touch her eye again, that same gentle, absent motion, as though something inside her vision was clouding her world. Lily's mind drifted back to her grandmother. The old woman had been a nurse of sorts, though untrained by any formal institution. She had healed ailments in people and animals alike, with old remedies and a deep, intuitive understanding of the body. Lily had often sat at her feet as a child, listening to her stories of healing and herbal remedies. She had learned that sometimes the body simply needed a gentle touch, a careful hand, and the right kind of patience. Her grandmother had once treated a simple eye infection with a technique that involved very delicate work, and as Lily thought about it now, it seemed like the perfect solution to what she had observed in Eliza's eyes. The risk was enormous. What if she misjudged the situation and caused Eliza harm? What if the Duke found out? He would never forgive her for acting without permission, especially with something as delicate as Eliza's sight. The thought of losing her job, and worse, causing harm to Eliza, was almost too much to bear. But there was something in her, a quiet, resolute voice that urged her forward. This was her chance, and it might be the only one she ever had. If she didn't act, Eliza might never know a life filled with color, light, or the simplest pleasures the world could offer. The need to help was overpowering, and it took precedence over her fear of consequence. The following day, as Lily worked quietly in the grand hallway, the mansion felt heavier than usual. She could feel her heart racing, her nerves taut with tension. She had made up her mind. She would act, despite the risks. But as she worked, the weight of her decision loomed over her. What if she was wrong? What if the Duke found out and fired her? What would become of her grandmother, who relied on her for support? Lily paused by the fireplace in the Duke's study, glancing around the room. Her gaze landed on the portrait of Catherine, Eliza's mother, smiling gracefully, a vision of warmth and love. The image of Catherine was so vivid in her mind, it felt as though the woman herself were present in the room. Lily felt an unspoken connection to the woman she had never met. The love Catherine had for Eliza was palpable in that painting, and it was clear that the Duke's promise to protect their daughter was a promise made in love. The thought of breaking that trust weighed heavily on Lily. She wasn't sure if it was her place to interfere with the Duke's grief, with his efforts to find a cure. But the realization that no one else had seen the signs, no one had noticed the faint discoloration in Eliza's eyes, pushed her to make a choice. The Duke had resources, but they had not solved Eliza's blindness. Maybe this was something that only Lily could address. That night, after everyone had retired to their rooms, Lily made her decision. She would not sleep until she had at least tried. She found a small, sterilized tool in the medical cabinet, used for cleaning minor wounds and injuries, and carefully approached Eliza's room. Eliza was sitting by the window, as usual, her small hands resting in her lap. She seemed lost in thought, unaware of Lily's presence. Lily hesitated in the doorway, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the moment. She had to act quickly before she lost her nerve. She took a deep breath and stepped into the room, her footsteps soft on the carpet. Eliza didn't look up, but her hand moved to her eye again, just as it always did. Lily approached her slowly, kneeling beside her. She held the small tool in her hand, feeling its weight, and for the briefest moment she second-guessed herself. But Eliza's soft breath, steady and calm, reassured her. This was the right thing to do. She gently touched Eliza's cheek to turn her face towards the light. Eliza didn't flinch, didn't move, trusting the stranger she had come to know as a gentle presence in her life. Lily carefully positioned the tool at the edge of Eliza's eye, feeling her pulse in her fingertips. She worked slowly, cautiously, praying that she wouldn't cause any harm. Her heart raced with each movement, but she knew she had no choice now but to trust her instincts. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft, almost imperceptible movement, Lily felt something give. She carefully removed the obstruction, which was a small, dense mass that had been lodged in Eliza's eye. It was darker than it should have been, almost like a foreign object, and Lily couldn't help but shudder as she held it in her hand. Eliza blinked, her eyes fluttering. Lily's breath caught in her throat as she watched the little girl's face soften, her expression changing ever so slightly. For the first time, Eliza seemed aware of the light around her. She blinked again, this time with a purpose, and Lily felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this had worked. Lily's hands trembled as she slowly pulled back. She didn't want to disturb the moment, unsure of what to expect, but she stayed close, watching Eliza with bated breath, praying that she had done the right thing. Eliza's eyes opened wider, a spark of recognition in her gaze as she looked up at Lily for the first time. The silence that had once filled the room was suddenly filled with a stillness, a breathless pause, and then Eliza spoke. "Light?" she whispered. Lily's heart swelled with joy. Tears sprang to her eyes. "Yes, Eliza," she whispered back. "You can see the light." In that moment, Lily knew she had done the right thing, even if it cost her everything. Days passed, and Lily found herself anxiously watching Eliza, her heart constantly in a state of hope and fear. The little girl, whose life had been shadowed by blindness, seemed to be changing in ways Lily could scarcely believe. At first, the signs were subtle, a faint fluttering of Eliza's eyelids as she blinked more frequently, almost as though she were adjusting to something new. Then, Eliza began to turn her head when the sunlight streamed through the window. Her small face tilted toward it, as though she could feel the warmth, but was still unsure of its source. Lily's breath caught every time Eliza moved in such a way, her heart swelling with cautious hope. Each time she observed Eliza, a sense of wonder stirred in her chest. It was as though a small miracle was unfolding before her eyes, though Lily dared not fully believe it yet. She didn't want to get her hopes up too high, in case she was mistaken. But the more she watched, the more certain she became something had shifted. Eliza's blindness was no longer as absolute as it had been. The obstruction in her eye, once thought to be the cause of her suffering, had been removed. It seemed that Eliza was finally beginning to see the world around her. Lily's mind was a whirlwind of emotion, relief, anxiety, joy, fear, wondering what would happen if Eliza's sight truly returned. What would this mean for the Duke? And what would he say when he found out that Lily, of all people, had played a part in this miracle? It happened one morning, as the sunlight filtered through the large windows in the parlor, casting a warm golden glow across the room. Lily entered quietly, as she always did, to tend to her duties. She had grown accustomed to Eliza's presence, though she never interrupted her quiet moments. Today, however, Eliza's usual stillness was interrupted. Lily froze as she watched Eliza's eyes flutter open. They didn't just blink, but seemed to focus on something more than just the light, something more than just the sensation of the room. Her little face, once blank and distant, now seemed alive with curiosity and confusion. Eliza blinked again, slowly, and then gasped a sharp intake of breath that filled the room with the sound of wonder. Lily stood motionless, her heart in her throat, as Eliza's gaze seemed to fix on the world around her for the first time. Eliza's eyes widened, taking in the details of the room, the shimmering chandelier above, the plush furniture, the small vase of fresh flowers on the table. She turned her head to the window and stared at the sunlight streaming in. Her fingers stretched out, reaching for the light as though trying to touch it. But then her gaze fell upon someone, her father, Duke Edward, who had entered the room quietly, watching his daughter from a distance, unaware of the transformation taking place before him. "Papa," Eliza whispered, her voice fragile but clear, the sound of it breaking the silence in the room. Lily gasped, a sob rising in her chest. Eliza had spoken her first word in 8 years. The word was simple, but it held so much weight. "Papa," she said again, her voice trembling, her eyes full of wonder as she looked at Duke Edward for the first time. Duke Edward, who had been observing Eliza from a distance, rushed to her side, his heart racing. His breath caught in his throat as he knelt beside her, unsure if what he was seeing was real. For years, he had been consumed by guilt and desperation, yearning for the moment when his daughter would finally see the world around her. But now, as Eliza's eyes locked onto his, a flood of emotions crashed over him. He reached out tentatively, almost as if afraid to break the fragile moment. "Eliza," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Can you see me?" Eliza smiled, the expression so full of joy and amazement that it made Duke Edward's heart swell with emotions he couldn't name. He couldn't believe it. His daughter, the child he had fought so hard to help, could finally see him, could finally see the world. The Duke's hands trembled as he touched her face, his eyes filled with tears. "You can see," he whispered in disbelief. "You can really see me." But as the reality of the moment set in, the Duke's joy was tinged with confusion. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. He had spent millions on specialists, traveled to the finest hospitals, and tried everything within his power to help Eliza regain her sight, only to hear the same diagnosis over and over. Her blindness is irreversible. And yet, here she was, speaking, seeing, and reacting to the world. He stood up, backing away from Eliza, a mixture of joy and disbelief clouding his thoughts. "But how?" he asked, turning his gaze to Lily, who stood at the door, her expression a mix of nervousness and something deeper, perhaps pride, perhaps fear. Lily swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. The moment she had feared was upon her. The Duke, with his sharp mind and keen eyes, had already begun to put the pieces together. She stepped forward, her hands trembling. "It was me, Your Grace," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I noticed something in Eliza's eyes, something that the doctors missed. I took the risk and removed the obstruction." The Duke's gaze hardened, a flicker of shock and anger flashing across his face. "You did what?" he demanded, his voice rising with the weight of disbelief and fear. "You without my permission? You interfered with my daughter's treatment?" Lily's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she couldn't speak. The terror of his reaction weighed heavily on her, but she knew she had to explain herself. I had no right to do it, but I couldn't just watch her suffer, Your Grace. The doctors, they had known about the obstruction. They told you nothing could be done, but they never told you the truth. I couldn't stand by any longer." The Duke's face twisted with a mix of emotions, anger, guilt, confusion. His mind reeled with the implications of what Lily was saying. "You mean to tell me that all those doctors, all those specialists, they knew?" he asked, his voice cracking as the weight of the truth began to sink in. "And they kept it from me?" Lily nodded, her heart heavy. "They took your money, Your Grace. They knew, but they didn't act. They let her live in darkness for years while they profited from your desperation." The Duke stood motionless, his mind struggling to process the overwhelming truth. For years he had trusted the doctors, believing that they had his daughter's best interests at heart. But now, the realization that they had betrayed him, that they had known the cause of Eliza's blindness and chose not to act, filled him with a crushing sense of betrayal. His wealth, his status, his desperation, none of it had mattered. His daughter had suffered because of greed and negligence. Lily, seeing the turmoil in the Duke's eyes, stepped back, her heart sinking. "I never meant to harm Eliza," she said softly. "I just wanted to help. I couldn't stand seeing her in darkness anymore. I took a risk, Your Grace. I hope you can forgive me." The Duke's expression softened, his anger giving way to a deep, weary sadness. He looked at Lily, his eyes filled with gratitude and guilt. "You saved her, Lily. You saved my daughter," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say." "Thank you." Lily shook her head, her eyes brimming with tears. "You don't have to thank me, Your Grace. I just did what anyone with a heart would have done." The Duke reached for her hands, his grip firm, a silent gesture of gratitude and recognition. "No," he said, his voice filled with a newfound respect. "You did what no one else could, and for that, I will be forever in your debt." The silence that followed was heavy, but it was no longer the silence of grief. It was the silence of understanding, of a shared truth that had finally been brought to light. Tears welled up in Lily's eyes as she watched the Duke kneel before his daughter. This moment, this miracle was beyond anything she had imagined when she first made the decision to act. She had saved Eliza, but in doing so, she had changed the course of her own life, for better or worse. And in that moment, Lily knew that everything had changed. The days after Eliza's transformation were filled with a quiet joy that had been missing from the Duke's estate for so long. The once quiet halls now echoed with the laughter of a little girl rediscovering the world she had always been denied. For Duke Edward, the sight of Eliza smiling, her eyes wide with wonder as she explored her surroundings, was a balm for his soul. But it wasn't just the return of her sight that filled him with gratitude, it was the realization that he had been wrong all along. He had spent years searching for the answer to his daughter's blindness, yet it had taken someone with no formal training to see what had been hidden in front of him. Lily, the humble maid, had done what the finest doctors in the world had failed to do. She had restored Eliza's sight with nothing but her intuition and courage. The Duke, who had once been dismissive of the lower classes, now found himself deeply humbled by the woman who had brought his daughter back to him. One afternoon, as the sun streamed through the grand windows of the Duke's study, he summoned Lily. His heart was heavy with a mixture of gratitude and guilt as he sat behind his desk, the weight of everything that had transpired pressing down on him. When Lily entered, she did so quietly, as she always did. She kept her head low, not daring to meet his gaze, uncertain of how to face him after all that had happened. "Lily," Duke Edward began, his voice firm yet soft with emotion, "I've given this a great deal of thought. You've done something for me and my daughter that no one else could. You've given Eliza a chance at life, a chance I thought was lost forever." Lily looked up, surprised by the depth of his words. She had expected to be reprimanded, to face some consequence for her actions, but instead, the Duke's gaze was filled with respect. She swallowed hard, unsure of what to say, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I've been wrong about so many things," the Duke continued, his voice thick with remorse. "I failed to see the truth when it was right in front of me. I trusted people who took advantage of my desperation, and in doing so, I neglected what truly mattered. But you," he paused, his eyes softening, "you saved my daughter. You gave her back her sight, and for that, I owe you more than I can ever express." Lily felt her breath catch in her throat. The weight of his words, the sincerity in his eyes, was almost too much to bear. She had never expected this level of gratitude. She had only acted because she couldn't stand to see Eliza suffer any longer. "I don't know how to thank you," the Duke said quietly, rising from his desk and walking toward her, "but I will. I want to offer you a position here, one that reflects the respect I now have for you. I want you to continue working with Eliza, to help guide her as she learns to navigate this new world she's seeing. You've formed a bond with her that no one else has, and I know that bond will be essential for her emotional growth." Lily's heart skipped a beat as she processed his words. The Duke was offering her something she had never dreamed of, a place by his side, not as a servant, but as someone who could contribute to Eliza's future. It was a gift she had never anticipated, and yet it felt right. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, Your Grace. I will do my best to help Eliza, I promise." Later that day, as Lily sat beside Eliza, watching the young girl absorb the world around her, the full weight of her actions settled in her heart. Eliza, once so withdrawn and silent, was now filled with an uncontainable joy. She gazed out the window at the garden, her eyes drinking in the vibrant colors of the flowers, the bright blue sky, the soft flutter of the birds that flitted past. She reached out to touch the petals of a flower, her fingers brushing the delicate surface as though testing the world for the first time. "Do you see it, Lily?" Eliza asked, her voice full of wonder. Lily smiled warmly, her eyes brimming with tears. "Yes, Eliza, I see it too. It's beautiful, isn't it?" Eliza beamed, her face radiating happiness. "Everything is so bright, so big. I can see the birds flying and the trees moving in the wind. It's all real." Lily nodded, her heart full of pride. "You have a whole world waiting for you now, Eliza." As Eliza turned to face her, her eyes filled with joy and wonder, she spoke softly, almost shyly. "Thank you, Lily, for helping me see. You're my first real friend." Lily's chest tightened as she held Eliza's gaze. In that moment, she realized how much Eliza had grown since that first day she had intervened. The girl who had once lived in a silent world of darkness was now awakening to a vibrant, colorful life, and Lily had been the one to help her. She felt a sense of fulfillment, of purpose, that she had never known before. But there was still a part of Lily that worried. What would this new position mean for her future? Would the Duke expect too much from her now that she was part of his inner circle? Would she ever be able to shake the label of being a lowly maid, no matter what role she played in Eliza's life? In the days that followed, Lily's place in the Duke's household changed. No longer just a maid, she was now entrusted with a role that carried more responsibility, more significance. She became Eliza's tutor and guide, helping the young girl learn how to navigate the world of sight. The bond between them grew stronger each day, as Eliza trusted Lily with her emotions, her fears, and her excitement. Yet, as Lily continued to work closely with Eliza, she couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. She was grateful for the Duke's offer, for the respect he now held for her, But she also felt a certain distance from the other servants. Some still viewed her with suspicion, unsure of how to treat someone who had been elevated so quickly, while others watched in awe, whispering about her miraculous role in Eliza's restoration. The Duke, for his part, never wavered in his gratitude. He frequently sought her counsel when it came to Eliza's care, asking her opinion on everything from Eliza's education to how she was adjusting to the world of sight. The trust he had in Lily was unwavering, and she knew she had earned it through her actions. If you enjoyed this story of courage, selflessness, and transformation, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales. Share your thoughts in the comments below. How would you have reacted if you were in Lily's shoes? Would you take the same risk? Let us know what you think. And remember, miracles don't always come in the form we expect. Stay tuned for more stories that remind us of the power of love and the unexpected ways it can change lives. Thanks for watching.